what happened in that week, because the offer that they finally accepted on Friday wasn't substantially different than the offer that they were made on Sunday.
Which they had rejected.
Yeah,
Subsequently rejected the first offer, and yet that was, you're right, Winston, was essentially what was accepted. Well, Dave, you were there.
I think you chose the word opaque. A lot of it was the same with me. What happened was that the political leadership did what the political leadership should do. That's the Alberta division of CUPE. They met and they decided to support the strikers. But they did not come anywhere close, in my view, to talking about a CUPE general strike. I don't think they seized the opportunity or saw that there was an opportunity. Now, being on staff, you sometimes know less about what's going on politically until afterwards than you would be if you weren't on staff. And to a large extent, I was shut out of it when it became critical. And now part of that might have been because I was on the verge of telling them to stick the job up their ass anyway. And I had not very good relations with some of the political leadership. But having said that, there was a job that needed to be done, and I was unable to do what I would like to have done. And but a lot of this is a matter of timing. I was just thinking about when would the public have really arisen to this occasion. It wouldn't have been long. The general, we were getting responses from the unions, particularly the public sector unions, but obviously some others as well. And there was starting to be quite a response from the public. In fact, by the time that whole thing was settled, the public was really on side. But by that time, the leaders had arrived and had, I think, decided that they could not sustain a major strike. Yeah. And I think, frankly, it's a lack of confidence in the workers, placing your confidence in a leadership role rather than understanding that the workers are the ones that you should, they're the bellwether, they're the ones you should observe and see. And from what I saw, that picket line was not going to budge. And they were just constantly given more and more spirit, because they kept hearing about others that were coming to their aid. And then, of course, it was taken indoors. That's what happened.
Yeah. I would say that it's important to note that when Dave talks about the political leadership, specifically the national president of CUPE came to Calgary and got involved in the negotiations, Judy Darcy, as well as the Alberta Division President, Terry Mutton.
As well as Carol Ann Dean.
As well as Carol Ann Dean, the president of AUPE. I think that Dave is right, and that is that the leadership were so busy behind closed doors trying to negotiate a deal that they didn't see what was happening on the streets. They didn't see what was happening across the province, and fundamentally, I would say drop the ball without putting too fine a point on it. I remember we were sitting in the executive council meeting, and we were debating this motion, and people were talking about how and what they could do to spread this strike. And people were very excited about it. Even very conservative trade unionists at the Alberta Federation of Labour. Our president at the time, Audrey Cormack, was known to be conservative. She was 100% behind building this strike. So that tells you that it had grabbed the imagination of the labor movement. But then we're in the middle of this discussion, and CUPE came in and said, basically told us there was a deal and it was all done. It was as if somebody had sort of pulled a very, very large plug on a very small bathtub.
Well, I think I have no idea what kind of information the people in the room in Calgary were getting. so I have no idea who was talking to Judy Darcy and Terry Mutton from CUPE. I don't know what conversations Bill had or you had with Carol Ann. In their defense, I think it's important to go back to something Winston raised earlier, which is some of the extremely punitive provisions of the labor laws in the province at the time. So what scared, I know, when I talked to them, what scared AUPE leadership, not necessarily in this context, but in a number of illegal actions that happened around that time at Michener Centre and Red Deer, wasn't the fines that were threatened. It wasn't even the suspension of dues that was possible under the terms of the legislation. It wasn't the contempt of court proceedings against, for example, union leadership, because at that point, any leadership would have been more than happy, I think, to spend a little bit of time in jail on that kind of issue. It was the threat of decertification, the threat that they could walk in and say, there's no longer a union here, period. Now, I think those of us around this table would say they could try it, but the workers wouldn't let them. But for people who'd come through the bruising period of the 1980s and early 1990s, and whose training and experience was in that limited North American business unionist approach, the threat of decertification was a nuclear deterrent. It was, after that, all bets are off, there's nothing there, unless the government somehow falls apart, which is hard to imagine, or the union simply loses. So that was what was preying, I'm sure, on their minds. But it is very hard not to feel that a huge opportunity was missed, even if it had gone on another 24 hours. If the two hospitals in Edmonton had then gone out and stayed out for 24 hours and said, we're staying out longer, then you'd have started to see some serious movement across the province, and the sense that the government had lost control. And that was what I think really scared them. It wasn't just that the public was supporting, both in polls and in letters to the editors and in honking their horns as they went by the picket line. It wasn't just the public was supporting the strikers. It was the sense that the government, for the first time, had lost any semblance of control. And this was a government that had thrived on bowling over the opposition and always being in control. And I think that scared them. And if the hospitals in Edmonton and a couple of other places had gone out and started to spread, in fact, it would have been better if it had spread slowly but steadily rather than all at once. I think the government was really scared, and I think that there was... it's hard to say what that would have meant in terms of a resolution, but I think that was a lost opportunity.